All right, today we're diving into the life of one of history's most brilliant and honestly most disruptive thinkers, a man named Peter Abelard. He was an absolute intellectual giant of the 12th century, and let me tell you, his ideas and his life were anything but ordinary.
To really get Abelard, you have to start with his reputation. I mean, this wasn't just some smart guy. He was an intellectual force of nature. He had a perfect memory, a razor-sharp tongue, and an ego the size of Paris. People said he was simply unbeatable in a debate. Even the people who hated him had to admit it.
And that's really the question we're going to tackle. We're going to peel back the layers on this guy, the man whose love affair became legendary, but whose philosophical revolution, well, that's what truly changed the course of Western thought. You see, Abelard's story kicks off with a massive act of rebellion. He was born into the nobility, so he was all set for a life of castles and knighthood. But he threw it all away for philosophy. He valued the life of the mind far more than any inheritance. What's so amazing is just how fast he made a name for himself. He didn't just study, he came to conquer. Around 1108, he completely humiliated his own teacher in a public debate. A few years later, he goes to study with the top theologian of the day, a guy named Anselm of Lyon, and basically says, "Yeah, I'm not impressed." After that, Abelard was his own master. He was pretty sure no one else had anything left to teach him. But Abelard's fame wasn't just forged in the lecture halls of Paris. His intellectual journey would get tangled up with one of the most famous and most tragic love stories of the entire Middle Ages. So, by this point, Abelard is basically a rock star scholar at Notre Dame. He gets hired to be the private tutor for Eloise, a young woman who was already known for her own incredible intellect. He was the master, she was the student, but their connection, well, it pretty quickly turned into something much, much more. And this is where their world just implodes. Their forbidden affair leads to a pregnancy, which leads to a secret marriage. But Héloïse's uncle, a very powerful man, felt his family's honor had been destroyed. He wanted revenge, and it was brutal. He hired thugs to attack and castrate Abelard. In the aftermath, both of them retreated from the world. He became a monk, she became a nun. Their lives were changed forever. Now, a personal catastrophe like that could have been the end of his story. But for Abelard, it actually marked a turn towards his most profound and his most controversial work. This is what would become his true legacy. He basically shook up philosophy in three huge ways. First, nominalism. He argued that big ideas like humanity aren't real things out there in the world. They're just words we use. Second, he insisted on using logic to understand faith, which was a huge challenge to tradition. And third, and this is what we're going to focus on, he came up with a radical new way of thinking about ethics. This is the question that's right at the heart of his ethics. For centuries, the answer seemed pretty simple. It's the action itself, right? The deed. But Abelard, he wasn't so sure. And this was a revolutionary shift. The old school view was all about the deed and its outcome. Abelard said, no, you're looking in the wrong place. For him, the only thing that truly matters for morality is your intention, what you agree to in your own mind. He took this idea all the way. He argued that the act itself, any act, is morally neutral. Our own legal systems kind of get at this. Causing a death is a tragedy, but we make a huge distinction between murder, which requires intent, and manslaughter, where the intent was different. For Abelard, this was everything. The guy who intends to build a shelter for the poor but gets robbed on the way is just as morally good as the guy who actually succeeds, because their intentions were identical. And here is his most shocking example. He argued that if the people who crucified Christ genuinely believed they were doing the right thing, they weren't evil. In fact, get this, he said they would have actually sinned if they had gone against their conscience. For Abelard, your intention is king. It's everything. As you can probably imagine, ideas this radical were bound to stir up some serious trouble. Abelard's whole approach of applying logic to faith put him on a collision course with the most powerful people in the church. His main opponent was this guy, Bernard of Clairvaux. He was an incredibly influential abbot who believed that faith was sacred and shouldn't be picked apart by something as flimsy as human logic. For Bernard, what Abelard was doing was arrogant and it was dangerous. This was a clash of two completely different worlds. So Abelard, ever the confident debater, calls for a public showdown to settle the matter. But when he shows up at the Council of Sens in 1140, he realizes it's not a debate at all. It was an ambush, a setup. a kangaroo court orchestrated by Bernard to take him down. Instead of getting to argue his points, he was just confronted with a list, 19 propositions taken from his own books that had already been condemned as heresy. He wasn't given any chance to defend himself, to explain his reasoning, nothing. Abelard just walked out. He planned to take his case all the way to the Pope in Rome. But Bernard's influence got there first. The Pope sided with the council and ordered Abelard to be silenced. His fighting days were over. He spent his last couple of years quietly, even reconciling with Bernard before he died in 1142. So, condemned and silenced. It really seems like Abelard lost, doesn't it? But here's the thing. The rebels' ideas were just too powerful to disappear. In the end, his true legacy was really just getting started. Look, the romance with Heloise, that's what made him a figure of legend. But it's his mind, his philosophical breakthroughs, that's what really cemented his place in history. And his influence was absolutely immense. Think about this. Despite the official condemnation, his students went on to become the leaders of the next generation. We're talking 3 future popes, a bunch of heads of state, and countless thinkers who carried his methods forward. The system tried to silence him, but his students ended up running the system. Ultimately, you have to understand that before the great works of Aristotle were rediscovered in Europe, Peter Abelard was the peak. He was the pinnacle. He pushed logic and reason as far as they could possibly go in his world. And that brings us right back to today. Abelard's most radical idea, that only your intention determines whether an act is moral or not, is a question we are still fighting over. Do we judge people for what they do or for what they meant to do? 900 years later, we're still grappling with Abelard's question.